On a warm evening in August 1943, a man stepped off a train in Bern, Switzerland, carrying a leather briefcase. Inside the briefcase were 186 classified cables from the German Foreign Office, military orders, diplomatic dispatches, intelligence summaries, each one photographed in secret over the previous 10 days while their custodian was supposed to be filing them. The man's name was Fritz Kolbe. He was 43 years old. He was a mid-level civil servant in the Nazi diplomatic machine, and he was about to walk into the American legation and hand Allen Dulles, the OSS station chief, the single most valuable intelligence haul the Allies had received from inside the Third Reich. No one had asked him to do this. No one had recruited him. He had decided, entirely on his own, that the regime he served was evil, and that the only thing a decent man could do was destroy it from within. The Americans, when they finally understood what he was offering, gave him a code name, George Wood. They would come to regard him as possibly the most important spy of the war. Fritz Kolbe would have settled for being remembered as a good man. He didn't get that either. Fritz Kolbe was born in 1900 in Berlin, into a family that was comfortable without being wealthy. His father was a saddle maker, skilled and respected, the kind of German craftsman who represented the old middle class that the 20th century would grind to pieces. Fritz grew up in the structured, disciplined world of Wilhelmine Germany, finished school, and entered the civil service because that was what young men of his background did. He was not political. He was not ideological. He was a man who believed in doing his work well and being left alone to do it. He joined the German Foreign Office in the 1920s, during the Weimar Republic, when Germany's diplomatic service was still staffed by professionals who believed in international order, however imperfectly. Kolbe served in minor postings, Madrid, Cape Town, and proved himself competent, reliable, and entirely unremarkable. He was the kind of man who keeps institutions running, meticulous with files, punctual with deadlines, invisible to those above him. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, Kolbe watched the transformation of the Foreign Office with a growing dread he shared with almost no one. The professionals were pushed aside. Party loyalists were promoted. The language of diplomacy was replaced by the language of conquest. Kolbe was not a hero by temperament. He did not make speeches. He did not join resistance cells. He kept his head down, did his work, and carried his private revulsion in silence, like a stone in his pocket. But silence has a cost, and by 1943, Kolbe could no longer afford it. What changed was not a single event but an accumulation. By mid-1943, Fritz Kolbe had been promoted, ironically, through the departure of better-connected men to military service, to a position in Karl Ritter's office. Ritter was the Foreign Office's liaison to the military high command. His office was, in effect, a clearinghouse for some of the most sensitive communications in the Reich, cables from embassies, military intelligence reports, orders from the OKW diplomatic assessments that revealed the inner workings of the Nazi war machine. Kolbe's job was to process these cables, route them, file them. He saw everything, and what he saw sickened him. Not the grand strategic picture, he was too junior to grasp all of it, but the details, the casual discussions of atrocities, the bureaucratic language applied to mass murder, the polite memos about deportations, the mathematical precision with which human beings were categorized, transported, and destroyed. Kolbe was not in a position to see the full scope of the Holocaust, but he saw enough of the machinery to understand what it was building. He made his decision sometime in the summer of 1943. It was not dramatic. There was no moment of crisis, no confrontation, no breaking point that makes for a clean narrative. He simply decided. He would photograph the cables that crossed his desk, and he would deliver them to the Allies. The problem was how. Kolbe had no intelligence training. He had no contacts in any resistance network. He was a filing clerk with a conscience and no idea how to reach the people who needed what he had. His first attempt was almost farcical. In the spring of 1943, he approached the British embassy in Bern during a courier run to Switzerland. He offered his services. The British turned him away. They suspected a trap. A German diplomat offering classified documents for free with no handler, no bona fides, no explanation beyond moral conviction. It didn't fit any pattern they recognized. Genuine volunteers were, in their experience, the rarest and most dangerous category of potential agent. Kolbe was devastated but not deterred. He tried again, this time through a different channel. A German émigré friend named Ernst Kocherthaler, who had contacts in the American diplomatic community, arranged an introduction to Alan Dulles, the head of the Office of Strategic Services in Switzerland. Dulles was a different kind of intelligence officer than the British had sent. He was an amateur in many ways, a Wall Street lawyer who had come to spying through connections rather than training, but he had an amateur's openness to the unexpected. When Kolbe appeared in his office in August 1943 and opened a briefcase full of photograph cables, Dulles did not dismiss him. He read the documents. He asked questions. And then he did something that would shape the rest of the war in ways that are still being calculated. He believed him. Between August 1943 and the end of the war, Fritz Kolbe made 5 trips to Bern, each time carrying batches of photograph cables. In total, he delivered over 1,600 classified documents to the OSS. The scale of this is difficult to grasp. This was not a single dramatic theft. It was a sustained, methodical campaign of espionage carried out by a man who went to work every morning in the beating heart of the Nazi state, photographed documents during his lunch hour or after colleagues left for the evening, concealed the film in his clothing or personal effects, and then traveled to Switzerland on legitimate courier duties that he had maneuvered himself into receiving. The risk was absolute. The Gestapo monitored the Foreign Office. Colleagues reported each other for careless remarks. The penalty for what Kolbe was doing was not imprisonment. It was execution, preceded by interrogation methods designed to extract every name, every contact, every detail of the operation before the body was disposed of. Kolbe took precautions, but they were the precautions of a careful bureaucrat, not a trained agent. He photographed cables after hours, using a Leica camera he kept hidden in his desk. He selected documents that would cause maximum damage without creating obvious gaps in the filing system. He varied his methods. He was meticulous, disciplined, and terrified, and he did it anyway month after month, for nearly 2 years. The intelligence he provided was extraordinary. The cables revealed German diplomatic strategy across occupied Europe. They exposed agents and informants. They detailed military deployments, supply routes, and defensive preparations. They provided advance warning of German responses to Allied operations. Dulles transmitted the material to Washington, where OSS analysts, initially skeptical, then astonished, cross-referenced it against other sources and found that George Wood's documents were consistently, almost unbelievably, accurate. One cable revealed that the Germans had broken a Turkish diplomatic code, which allowed the Allies to shut down a critical security breach. Another provided details of German agents operating in neutral countries. Others gave insight into the tensions between the military and the Nazi Party leadership, the fractures in the command structure that the Allies would eventually exploit. Dulles later wrote that Fritz Kolbe was, in his professional judgment, the most important intelligence source the OSS had inside Germany. Other historians have gone further, arguing that George Wood was the most valuable single spy the Western Allies possessed in the entire European theater. Kolbe himself kept no diary of this period. What survives are the documents he delivered, Dulles's reports, and the testimony of Kocherthaler. From these, a picture emerges of a man operating under almost unbearable pressure. A man who went home each evening to an empty apartment in Berlin, ate his dinner alone, and then lay awake wondering whether tomorrow would be the day the Gestapo knocked on his door. They never did. The war ended. Fritz Kolbe survived. He expected, reasonably, he thought, that his extraordinary service to the Allied cause would be recognized. That the new Germany, the democratic Germany that was being built from the rubble, would understand what he had done and why. He was wrong. The Cold War transformed the moral landscape of post-war Europe with brutal efficiency. West Germany needed an intelligence service. The Americans needed West Germany to have one. And the men best qualified to run it were, overwhelmingly, the men who had run Hitler's. Reinhard Gehlen, who had led military intelligence on the Eastern Front, was recruited by the CIA and given command of what became the BND, West Germany's federal intelligence agency. His staff was populated with former Nazi intelligence officers, men who had served the regime that Fritz Kolbe had risked his life to betray. These men did not thank Kolbe. They blacklisted him. In their logic, Kolbe was not a hero, he was a traitor. He had betrayed his own government, regardless of what that government was. The fact that the government he betrayed was conducting genocide did not, in their professional calculation, change the fundamental equation. A man who betrays once will betray again. Kolbe was quietly shut out of the diplomatic service. His applications were denied. His record was buried. He spent his final decades in obscurity. He tried to start a small business. He moved between Germany and Switzerland. He lived modestly, then poorly. Alan Dulles, who had praised him as the most important spy in Europe, did not publicly acknowledge him. The intelligence relationship was classified, and Dulles, who went on to lead the CIA, had other priorities. Fritz Kolbe died in 1971. He was 70 years old. His obituary, in the few publications that noted his passing, did not mention George Wood. It took decades for Fritz Kolbe's story to surface. Lucas Delettre's biography, published in 2003, drew on OSS archives, Kolbe's surviving correspondence, and interviews with people who had known him. In 2004, Germany's foreign minister formally honored Kolbe's memory and named a conference room in the Foreign Office after him. The same building where he had photographed cables 60 years earlier. The recognition came too late for Kolbe. It always does for people like him. The world is efficient at rewarding those who serve power and inefficient at rewarding those who defy it. Fritz Kolbe defied the most powerful and murderous state in modern European history, not with guns or bombs, but with a camera and a briefcase and the quiet, relentless conviction that the documents crossing his desk were evidence of a crime, and that passing them to people who could act on them was not betrayal but duty. He was not a soldier. He was not trained for courage. He was a filing clerk who decided on his own, without support, without recognition, without any guarantee that it would matter, that he would not be a bystander. Over 1,600 times, he made that decision again. The conference room in Berlin that bears his name is a small room. Most people who pass through it do not know who Fritz Kolbe was. But the documents he smuggled out, those survive in the National Archives in Washington, box after box, cable after cable. They are the receipts of one man's conscience. And they are still there. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold front. New stories every week.